In the last couple of videos, I've talked about the dark, corrupt side of Portuguese football. Among the many unfair, biased criticisms that I received, there was one comment that got my attention. Maybe I should paint a better picture of Portuguese football. There's corruption everywhere. In smaller divisions, in the most well-known leagues, everyone has skeletons in their closets. So, in order to create a more positive, nostalgic vibe, more in tune with what I want Thorn FC to be, I'm gonna take you back in time to a period that's very near and dear to my heart. In this video, we'll take a look at Portugal's best World Cup performance in the 21st century. We'll analyze what made this Portugal much better than the supposed goal generation they have nowadays, the magic environment that the Seleção generated in the country at the time, but also the faults and stupid mistakes that held the team back from ultimate glory. So first, and as usual, let me give you some context. After a historic participation in Euro 2004, where they ended up as runners-up, Portugal began their new qualifying cycle without many of the faces that we had grown accustomed to seeing for the past 10 years. Gone were Rui Costa, Fernando Couto and starman Luís Figo, who were all entering the autumn of their careers. To add more fuel to the fire in this new era of instability, their first choice left back Nuno Valente also suffered an injury that would render him unable to return to his best form ever again. That by itself is already tragic, but the fact that the Seleção didn't properly diagnose his injury caused FC Porto to have even more reasons to despise the country's national team. After all, Scolari snubbed Vitor Bahia for the Euros when he was fresh off a wonderful season where he became the best goalkeeper in Europe. Funny enough, this won't be the last you hear about Pinto da Costa complaining about Porto being poorly treated by the national team, so wait until the end of the video, then let me know if you think the Dragons were right or not. Anyways, instability very rarely leads to good results on the pitch, and despite having a pretty accessible group, Portugal stumbled in the worst way possible. Playing against fucking Liechtenstein, Portugal went into halftime with a 2-goal lead. They weren't playing spectacularly, but no one could have predicted what would happen in the second half. Just 3 minutes after returning from the locker room, Liechtenstein reduced the lead to just 1 goal, and instead of trying to build it up again, Portugal decided to take out Simão and solidify their lines by bringing in Petit. Later on, they would also remove the trailblazing Ronaldo, and what did they gain from it? An equalizing goal that they wouldn't be able to overturn. Portugal drew against Liechtenstein. It was an embarrassing result and an awful indicator of what the future could hold for a country that wasn't yet used to going to every Euro and World Cup like they are nowadays. But thankfully, that match was nothing more than a wake-up call. Portugal would win the next couple of matches comfortably, even putting 7 goals past Russia and 6 past Luxembourg. Overall, despite the ridiculous Liechtenstein draw and the occasional lack of creativity by the Seleção, it's safe to say that this was an easy qualification. Much easier than what they would get the fans accustomed to in the next couple of years. Besides, despite not being one of the favorites unlike in Euro 2004, there was still a positive climate around the national team, with many players starting to cement their legacy as world class. Ricardo Carvalho was fully living up to the standards left by Fernando Couto. Miguel, a guy you barely hear about nowadays, was a beast at the peak of his powers. And despite losing Jorge Andrade, his replacement Fernando Meira was nothing to look down on. He was a seasoned Bundesliga player who would help Stuttgart reach an improbable league title just 1 year after this World Cup. In midfield, Portugal had a nice mix of flair and grit. Petit and Costinha were the defensive workhorses, Maniche was the clutch player that always showed up when it mattered the most, Thiago was one of the most precise passers in the game at the time, and obviously, there was one of the best players in the world, fresh off another Champions League title, Deco. On the wings, you had the emerging Ronaldo seen by many as the heir to Figo's throne, while Simão was acting as a pretty decent immediate replacement. And as a cherry on top, you'd get Figo's return to the national team just 2 years after he announced his retirement. Up front, their star striker Pauleta was coming off a fantastic season where he finished as a top goal scorer in Liga in an era where PSG was just a mid-table club. Now, this looks good on paper, but there were still major controversies going into the World Cup, namely between Scolari and Porto. Ever since the Brazilian took over, he never rated Bahia and continued to not call him up in any match after Euro 2004. this could be just a weird option, but when Quaresma rose to an elite level in 04-05 and Scolari acted like he didn't even exist, Porto fans started to believe there was a conspiracy against them. You know, the usual. But it's hard to believe they're wrong, since Scolari's only selections from Porto were bench player Ricardo Costa, mostly thanks to Jorge Andrade's injury, and fucking Bruno Val, one of Porto's young keepers who had spent the season on loan to Estrela Amadora. I mean, it wasn't bad for his age or anything, but considering you had Bahia still playing at a decent level, why not call him up at least for a substitute role? Casillas played that role in 2016 and he had already been declining for quite some time. Either way, this provocation, or innocent choice depending on your perspective, ended up being completely futile since Val injured himself just a few days before the tournament, and in his place came Paulo Santos. Perhaps many fans assumed Val would have another chance to play in a major tournament like this, but little did they know that he would even play for Porto ever again, let alone for his national team. Regardless, these were the 23 men who had the chance to make history for their country. You could certainly debate over some inclusions, but it was their duty to perform better than the disastrous run from 2002. Portugal had an equally accessible group in 2006. They were up against their former colony Angola, Iran and Mexico, but in 2002 they played against South Korea, Poland and the USA, and they failed to progress past that group. So, despite the accessible draw, Portugal needed to take things seriously. Thankfully, unlike in Euro 2004, a Seleção didn't have to deal with any major scares in the group stage. In their first group stage match against Angola, Portugal kicked things off in a demolishing way. Less than 5 minutes after the first whistle, Figo assisted Pauleta in a goal that felt like the first of many that afternoon. But Angola kept their shit together, unlike in their last encounter with Portugal where they started spamming tackles and receiving cards left and right. As the game progressed, Portugal decided to play it safe and let the Angolans play, which in this case turned out to be the smart move since they were unable to create any significant danger to Ricardo's goal. In the end, Portugal got the 3 points against a decent Angolan side that promised to bring more to the table than just Loco's weird haircut. Next up, Portugal went toe-to-toe with Iran. Now, obviously, Iran was much weaker than Portugal defensively, but they had Ali Karimi, one of the most creative players from that era. The problem was that Karimi was just returning from a serious ankle injury, and just like in Iran's first match against Mexico, he wasn't able to influence the team's creative process that much. However, Iran proved to be tough as nails to beat. For over 60 minutes, Portugal tried multiple times to reach the back of the net without success, until Deco finally unlocked the game for Portugal. This match also went down in history for marking the first time Ronaldo scored in a World Cup, and to the amusement of all the brain-dead kids who like to shout Penaldo, yes, it was a penalty kick goal. But it was that goal that sealed Portugal's presence in the round of 16 and yet another victory in a campaign that fully contrasted with the embarrassment of 2002 and 1986. In the final match against their toughest opponent, Portugal had the luxury of resting their best players for a round of 16 match that was shaping up to be a fiery one. And even though Portugal was playing with their bench, which you could certainly say was much weaker than what you see nowadays, they got the 2-goal lead in less than 30 minutes. First by the inevitable Maniche, and shortly after with a penalty kick by Simão Sabrosa. You'd be mistaken if you thought this was an easy win though. I remember leaving kindergarten with Mexico dominating Portugal, only to arrive home, quickly turning on the TV, and immediately catch Simão Sabrosa's goal. Mexico will reduce the lead, but Portugal would guarantee another win and first place going to the knockouts. However, Portugal had to go against the mighty Netherlands, who were brewing an exciting goal generation capable of rivaling every country on earth. It could have been a tactical masterpiece or a showing of class and individual brilliance by the multiple young ballers in each squad, but instead, it turned into an all-out brawl. The Netherlands got what they wanted by taking young Ronaldo out of the game, but it would be their Euro 2004 executioner that would end their dreams once again. This time, without so much flair, but with the same cunning positioning. At this point, many started to believe it was possible to achieve the impossible. I mean, since Greece won the Euros, why couldn't Portugal win the World Cup? But first, they had to go up against an English side thirsty for revenge, with a renewed sense of confidence, ready to obliterate their holiday destination that was starting to believe there was someone alongside the mighty English. Except, the only thing England obliterated that night was Ricardo Carvalho's balls. No goals were scored in 120 minutes of play, so it would take another dramatic penalty kick shootout to decide who the better nation was out of the two. And Ricardo was once again the hero, saving 3 penalty kicks from Lampard, Gerrard and Carragher. 40 years later, Portugal was in the World Cup semis. But there was one problem. A Seleção had to go up against Les Bleus, a team that the Portuguese certainly didn't share many good memories with. Portugal had been eliminated from Euro 84 and Euro 2000 by the French, always in a dramatic / controversial way. And this time, it was also another penalty kick by Zidane that did the trick to end the Portuguese dream. Honestly, I've seen Portugal being eliminated from international tournaments 9 times out of 10. And I wish I could say they always went down like this, simply outplayed by a nation that was better than them. In most cases, I feel like Portugal has everything to be better, and in the end, they collapse against weaker opponents or equally capable nations in the most unlucky circumstances. Above all, I think we got closure. Portugal was fantastic in 2006. It was the most tactically sound Portugal I've seen in my lifetime. A team that not only knew how to remain solid at the back, but could also consistently score goals. Nowadays, I feel like we can only choose one, despite having an overall much better and deeper squad. And if anything, Portugal has only gone up in football's power dynamics. 20 years ago, there were many teams that you could say were much better than Portugal. Nowadays, I can only count Spain and maybe Argentina. And do you know why that is? Because we have a huge rotation of world-class players. In 2006, Portugal had guys like Canedo, Uviana or Luís Boa Morte on their bench. I mean, they weren't horrible, but if I had to make a comparison, I'd say they were at the level of Gaio, Eustáquio and Bruma respectively. And you don't see those names anywhere near receiving a call-up. It's kind of ironic since I made a video calling Brazilian managers outdated, but Portugal hasn't had a good manager since Scolari. Sure, Fernando Santos won the Euros and he technically had a strategy that worked, but he failed to adapt to the growth of Portugal's talent, and Roberto Martinez is pretty much a puppet at the ends of the federation. So, as a Portuguese, my wish is that Portugal finds a manager who can make us collectively excited about Portugal's matches once again. One who makes us relive the joy of 04 and 06 and finally turns our potential into reality. But what do you think? Is Portugal from 2006 the best you've seen play? Let me know in the comments below and make sure you subscribe to Thorn FC so you don't miss any of my future videos. I'm already planning to make a deep dive on the time Blues won the league, Sporting's apocalypse in 2018, as well as Portugal's 1986 World Cup disaster, so your feedback is crucial in deciding which video might come out first. As always, thanks for watching until the end, I appreciate your support, and I will see you in the comments.